Good morning, everyone, and those of you who are in a different time zone, good afternoon. I'm Jeff Helsing, and I'm the Executive Director of the Better Evidence Project here at the Carter School at George Mason University. And we are really excited to host this session. We are actually kicking off the Carter School's Peace Week, and there are many interesting and very relevant sessions over the course of this week, so that we really hope that you will be able to join additional sessions as well. A couple of notes before we get right into the into our session and go to our speakers. First of all, this is being recorded. And so I just want to make that known. We're not recording it to do anything other than to highlight and take advantage of the speakers that we have. And secondly, if everyone can just mute their mics, and that would be great. And that way we'll give over to the speakers in just a second. The purpose of this session is really to dig more deeply into how the peace building field can develop relevant and usable evidence. And we at the Carter School are particularly focused on this question because we are a school that combines scholarship and practice. Many of our faculty are individuals who are working in conflict-affected societies, working on projects. We're trying to connect scholarship and research to the particular conflict-affected situation or society. And so with that in mind, we actually, and we're just about to start this, the Carter School is developing a new initiative. We're calling it the Evidence to Action Initiative, in which we are going to be trying to find ways of connecting research, scholarship, sets, evidence to practice. What's happening on the ground in conflict-affected societies. And part of what we want to do is serve as a hub, as a way of connecting researchers, scholars, practitioners, those with experience on the ground. And so part of what this session is going to do is be an initial part of how we're going to try to, through the Better Evidence Project at the Carter School and through the Carter School more broadly, really find ways of connecting evidence to action, so that the practice, those that are dealing with conflict issues, can find connections that we in the research world, we in the academic world can learn from, and find ways of enabling practitioners to contribute to the evidence that we hope will be driving programming, policy making, new research efforts, how donors decide on priorities, etc. So as part of this evidence to action sort of focus, that's why we have decided to kick off this Peace Week with our session today. We have with us 4 representatives who will talk about the work that they are doing or their institutions are doing around evidence itself. And each one will speak to how their institution and their work has highlighted or spotlighted evidence and the ways in which they are trying to strengthen the capacity of the peace building field to really develop more evidence-based peace building, peacemaking, or war prevention. So the four institutions in order of who we're going to hear from include Search for Common Ground, the Alliance for Peacebuilding, the Better Evidence Project here at George Mason, in the United States Institute of Peace. And so without anything further, what we'll do is we'll hear from each of our four speakers, Jack Farrel of the Search for Common Ground, Jessica Zuzig-Baumgardner of the Alliance for Peacebuilding, Ziad Al-Ashkar of the Better Evidence Project, and then Sandra Tombe of the United States Institute of Peace. Each will speak for about 10 or 15 minutes. And then after they have all spoken, we will open up our forum for questions. We will do questions. We can do questions both for those who are in person, but also you can send questions in via the chat, and we will cultivate them and get to them after each of the speakers. So with that in mind, let me start with Jack Farrel, who is working with the learning team at Search for Common Ground. He's been very engaged with the work that they've done to develop their new global impact framework and finding ways to try and bring the field more together through what they've called the Connexus platform. And Jack has considerable experience in program design, monitoring, and evaluation. And he joins us from the United Kingdom.
Jeff, I'm very happy to be here. And I'm just seeing there's about 22 people in the waiting room. So you have a ton of people trying to get in. This is the most popular party in town at the moment.
Top right. Yeah.
While you do that, I'm just going to share my screen.
Thank you, Jack.
Perfect. So, hello everyone. As Jeff kindly said, my name is Jack Farrel. I am the manager for partnerships and strategic innovation at Search for Common Ground. And I'm really excited to be joining you all from London this morning. As a brief introduction, and as Jeff said, Search are the world's largest dedicated peacebuilding organization. And throughout all aspects of the organization's work, we place a huge emphasis on evidence, learning, and impact. So since 2011, Search has been home to DME for Peace, which is a global knowledge platform to improve the effectiveness of programmatic interventions in conflict-affected contexts through access to learning. We've over 2,500 resources around peacebuilding evaluation and innovations from practitioners, evaluators, and everyone in between around the world. Additionally, since 2013, Search has published all of our evaluations and reports online so that any organization can learn from the work that we do, both good and bad. So as you all know, the peacebuilding field continues to face a number of challenges with regards to evidence. We know that our work is hard to measure, and we also know that there's a lack of shared understanding in what to measure. As a result, we not only fail to have a substantive knowledge base to inform the design, development, and implementation of more impactful programming, but we also struggle to articulate the impact of our work to the general public, and really, let's be honest, to the donor community as well. You know, everyone cares about peace, but few people care about peace building. So there have been a number of efforts over the past decade to help establish a shared knowledge base for the field, and I'm just excited to share a couple with you all today. So firstly, I want to share the global impact framework. So why are we doing this, and what will it look like? So as I said, the problem is that we face as a field is that we don't have a coherent way of speaking about impact in the world. that's driving priorities and wrong conversations about peace. So we don't know if we're making the right investments. We don't know sort of what the return in our investments are, depending on the type of project or the context. There's no common language for understanding peace or what it is or what we need to measure it. What we also find is local practitioners and practitioners that are implementing these projects have little say in setting strategies or in standards. And the people affected most by the conflict get even less say. And traditionally, reporting has become the priority. We focus on what outputs and outcomes there are tied to the donor. So we're focusing on short-term project cycles rather than actual long-term learning, accountability, and designing programs for those living and working in conflict. So how do we come about sort of creating a global impact framework? So we asked people working on peace and conflict around the world, in communities and across 30 different organizations, about what themes and measures made sense. What was it feasible for them to track? What did they want to see change about the way that we thought about evidence in our field? And from there, we developed what we're calling our global impact framework, which is based on 5 themes and 3 pillars. So when we were starting this process, we decided to do sort of a mapping of sort of the current measures in our field to understand sort of what the frameworks are for conflict and peace related to donors and implementing organizations. As you can see, there's quite a range here in both formality, informality, individual, and global. What we tried to do through the global impact framework was not only see this mapping of the field, but try to come together and create a shared structure that integrates all of these different measures moving forward. So, like I said, it's simple. It's 3 pillars, it's 5 themes, and there's only 10 indicators. It was developed with input from people living in conflict. When people ask how we chose the themes or indicators, the answer is pretty simple. It wasn't me, it was the entire field. It's designed to evolve. One thing that we are very aware of is this is not going to be a perfect science or a perfect framework from implementation. It's going to take time, and we're going to find out through implementation and through other organizations utilizing the framework whether or not these measures are right for them. And lastly, it's structured to encourage sharing. So from high-level advocacy work to community vendors, anyone interested in transforming conflict, not only peace builders, but those working in conflict-affected contexts, can identify what matters most to them and use the framework in a way that's relevant to them, while at the same time contributing to evidence in our field. So here are the 5 thematic areas that we're tracking through the framework. These are resource investments, institutional legitimacy, collective polarization, personal agency, and physical violence. Now, I'm not going to unpack all of these indicators, but I'm happy to share my slides afterwards. As you can see, each of these indicators that have been selected, 2 per theme, have been selected based on sort of interaction with the field. So I know Jessica, who was the sort of mastermind behind the Irene Peacebuilding database, you'll see that's referenced quite a bit here, as well as SDGs, the work of CIPRI, the work of other organizations. And we're really excited about how these indicators can be utilized and adapted moving forward. So what are the 3 areas that we're going to be tracking? So the first I'll talk about, and this is not in the order that they are in the slide. So the first are the aligned measures. So that is the common starting point that you've seen. So those 5 themes with 2 indicators per theme, those are what we're calling the aligned measures, which will allow us to monitor trends of conflict and of our impact across conflict geographies, across programs, and across a long period of time. The other 2 pillars are incredibly important. Sorry, I was just muted.
Oh, that's creative. You got cinnamon coffee.
Okay, I think the muting. Okay, I think we're back. Let's go right ahead. So the first pillar is lived experience. So lived experience is about understanding sort of making sure that your program is grounded and accountable to the community within which you're working. So that is working with local communities to identify indicators that are specifically relevant to them. As I mentioned, and I'm not sure if this got cut off while I was muted, the aligned measures are the 5 themes that I mentioned with the 2 indicators across each theme. And then the final one is expert observation and reflection. So this is the idea of shared reflection, the idea of thinking about projects and programs as more than just, you know, specific outputs that are relevant to your quarterly report for your donor. This is drawing on the experience of those who are actually doing the work, allowing them to sit down on a quarterly basis and think about what worked, what didn't, and why, and then adapt the programs moving forward. So as you can see, this is how we see the global impact framework working. This is how they all tie in together. And over the next couple of years, we'll be implementing sort of the global impact framework, not only across all of our programs at Search for Common Ground, but this is available for anybody around the world to use to understand the impact of their work, to utilize, you know, the first pillar around localized indicators and grounded accountability, the second around shared measures and sort of a shared understanding, and the third around shared reflection. Our ultimate goal is to generate evidence that is a knowledge base for the field. And then once we've generated that evidence, you know, synthesize it, review it, analyze it, and share the evidence with the wider public to actually articulate what the impact is of peace building programming and programming in conflict affected contexts. Our goal then is that this evidence will inform strategy, it will inform advocacy and donor implementation of projects moving forward. So, you know, moving on from the global impact framework, the last thing I just want to share, because I don't want to take up too much time, is one of the ways that we're socializing the global impact framework is through Connexus. At Search and through our digital platforms like DME for Peace, we believe that through the provision of access, through greater coordination, collaboration, and connection, we can create a far greater positive impact. So many of you will be aware and have participated and contributed to DME for Peace over the last decade. It's been accessed and utilized by over 300,000 users in 191 countries. But in the next few weeks, we will be turning the lights off on DME for Peace and migrating all of the features on the platform into Connexus. So this is the Connexus rebrand. So through Connexus, we're building on that decade of experience to create a global learning, networking, and impact platform for civic actors in conflict-affected contexts who are trying to make a positive impact in their community. So Connexus is free to use and open to anyone. It's available in a variety of languages, with users able to access nearly 3,000 resources tied to learning, design, evaluation, and implementation of programming in conflict. Anyone around the world can use the platform to start a discussion, to share their work and connect with others. And we want to make sure that we can create a space for local actors to more directly contribute to the global knowledge ecosystem. So one of the reasons behind why we're rebranding DME for Peace as Connexus was to more deliberately include both non-evaluators and non-peace builders in the platform. Not only evaluators learn from our projects, and not only peace builders work in conflict. We want to move beyond seeing peace building as an isolated field of work and position peace building at the heart of a community of sectors who are working to create a positive impact in their community and in these conflict affected contexts. We also want to create these nexus points, these intersections between the peace building field and every other sector that potentially comes into contact with us, such as climate change, the private sector, technology, human rights, and provide a platform that really works as a connection point for those different sectors to communicate and to share their stories of impact and learn from each other's programs. So we have a ton of innovative features on Connexus, including a partnership mapping tool and a digital version of the global impact framework where anyone can understand how to use the framework, apply it in their work. So I would just encourage you to pop all over to cnxus.org, sign up and share it with your networks and contribute to a global community of people who are creating local impact. So thank you all for your time, and I'm looking forward to discussing this all with you further.
Great. Thank you very much, Jack. And that's really a great way to sort of kick us off, and really exciting to hear about the what you've created, both with the global impact framework, but also enhancing our ability to connect with each other around the world through Connexus and the migration of DME for peace. I think one of the most important things that I take away from what you just went over is that in the field, we have developed tools and technology that enables us to overcome some of the inabilities to connect or bring in different perspectives that you talked about, hearing from non-peace builders, hearing from those who aren't in the evaluation field. So this is really exciting for the potential in terms of what's being developed. So now it's incumbent upon those of us in this work to be able to take advantage of such really interesting technology. So thank you very much. We're going to move now to Jessica. She's, as I mentioned, head of programs for the Alliance for Peacebuilding. And as Jack noted, she's very much behind the Irene database. And so she joins us online as well. And we'll talk a little bit about the Irene peacebuilding database that the Alliance has developed. So thank you for joining us, Jessica.
Well, thank you all so much for inviting me today. It is such a pleasure to be with old friends and hopefully new connections here as well. Jack and I have been working through the Peacebuilding Evaluation Consortium for I think as long as either of us have been at our respective organizations and beyond, and obviously working very heavily with USIP and with the Better Evidence Project. So it's a real joy to see this convening. So thank you so much. As Jeffrey shared with you, and I think Jack also gave some great allusions to, so thank you so much. I'm with the Alliance for Peacebuilding, and I'm going to speak to you today about the Irene Peacebuilding database. This was a project, I think, I'm hoping that this isn't too new for many people, but I do have some exciting information on new developments that are happening this year. But the Irene Peacebuilding database was a pioneering effort for us to map indicators across the peacebuilding field. And we set out on this journey in order to help peacebuilders both better assess their work and measure impact. And this started over 4 years ago in its creation. And our first release, version 1, came out in early 2020. I actually think it was probably the last meeting that I attended in person. And I think for many of us as well, it was right at the end of February in 2020. And that version contained almost 3,400 peacebuilding indicators from over 2,000 publicly available resources. Now, Irene is built in an interesting way that we inductively created our indicator areas. So what we did is actually scope through the broad peacebuilding literature, which at the time is at over 2,000 resources, which seems like a lot, but is also quite limited when we consider a corpus of research or evidence. And from that, we pulled all indicators and their subsequent measures, demographic information, program approaches, pretty much anything related to that indicator to try to contextualize it within its actual program. Now, this database is not a question of quality. And I just want to stress that again, this is a curation of any and all that are available across our field. And then with that information, we inductively moved up. So we started with the measures, we went to the indicators, we created what we call sub-indicators or sub-areas to help us understand, what do rule of law indicators look like? There's a lot of things that fall into that, not just quality of rule of law as an example. And then we inductively developed 7 indicator areas at that time, looking at dispute resolution, governance, perceptions of safety and security, resilience, trust, social cohesion, and violence reduction. Jack made mention to a couple issues around no common language in our field, and this is still true. However, I think we've made a lot of progress in many years. And this was one way for us to develop more of a high-level ontology of the peacebuilding field to try and understand how do peacebuilding outcomes look based upon the way peacebuilding programming are measuring their outcomes. What does that look like? So in 2021, we undertook actually a second expansion of Irene. Because we had stopped collecting resources at the end of 2019, we realized that a lot of new research had come out. And I think that's really exciting that in the last few years, we have seen a breadth of new evaluations, evaluation approaches from localized participatory up to RCTs and impact evaluations coming out about our field. As part of this expansion, we pulled an additional 7,000 new indicators from a little over 2,100 resources published since the end of 2018, which expanded the database to over 10,000 indicators. The results of that are currently being incorporated into what we're calling a version 2.0 of Irene that we're going to be releasing actually in its digital form in the coming year. So why digital and why now? One thing that I can share, and I think that Jack was hitting upon this so aptly, is we recognize that only pulling indicators from the academic information, academic sources, white sources, evaluation sources, predominantly focused on English, French, and Spanish, limits the type of indicators that we know are being used in the field. How do we pull localized and hyper-contextualized indicators that maybe don't make it into a formal evaluation? So the digital release is going to include a participatory method that allows individuals to not only provide commentary and quality assessments of indicators to both indicate that they've used them in a different context or in a different way, as well as recommend new indicators for consideration that may not have appeared in the current version of the database or maybe aren't published in a formal evaluation. So we're really excited about this because we feel that the ongoing breadth and capacity to use Irene is in her not only remaining, sorry, I often anthropomorphize it as a she, not only remaining relevant, but continuously adapting, as Jack was also speaking about, because the process of creating good indicators for our field, as we're seeing the global impact framework starting to do for search and being applied elsewhere, is that we have to first focus on how do we combine, how do we concatenate, what does this look like? That's where Irene first came in. As Jack was even referencing, some of their indicators came from, which is really exciting. The second stage is, well, what do we do with this? How do we start to quality test this? And that's where I think the global impact framework is really coming in, pulling certain ones, limiting the scope, and testing and validating those through ongoing iterative approaches. I mean, it's really the root of the scientific method here. And then hopefully we'll start to get from that some forms of standardization. So just to think a little bit on what purposes Irene did serve, can serve, and I would say the value of databases, because I'm very excited for both Sandra to be joining us and Zayed and talking about not only the evidence to action initiative, but thinking through the Better Evidence Project's resource curation and what that can look like and how it can help advance the field even further. So a couple of ways that you can use Irene. One, it's a starting point for program design. We all know that we need to invest time and resources in exploring what's been done, how that looks in different contexts, what could be applicable to our work, but it's really hard to find that information. Irene helps curate all of that by cataloging and tagging target groups, program approach, country where it's completed, the indicators. It has a lot more than just indicators to help you understand how you could also access the original resources. It also can serve as a inspiration when designing M&E frameworks and creating program indicators. We all, as know, if you are a researcher or a MEL individual, we use other programs as inspiration all the time for designing our M&E frameworks, but we don't always know how to find or select the best fit examples. So being able to see a huge variety curated for you based upon your specific information and your needs can help you better select what may be a good measure or indicator in your specific context. And then, as I was mentioning, as we see with what Jack was pointing towards and some of the work that I know Better Evidence Project is doing, is how we can start defining key indicators for the peace building field and seeking some forms of standardization. The Global Impact Framework is a great example of that, where we have limited indicators, but repetition and replication across multiple contexts as we can start to understand collective impact and better assess the overall outcomes of our programs across multiple contexts and conflict situations. I do want to just hit upon a few components of why data sets are so important. On average, we as data consumers, we are assaulted by far too much information and are well beyond data saturation. I was trying to find some updated statistics because it's just mind baffling, but it's estimated that we create 2.5 quintillion bytes of data a day. That is insanity. Over the last 2 years, that actually accounts for 90% of all of the data generated since the start of man. So there's a lot of data going on around us. They average 332 billion emails per day are sent. So how can we possibly be good data users or data stewards and understand what to process through? We also know, in the world of data sets, what they can do is help to curate that experience for us. Does it have limitations? Could it have missed opportunities? Of course, but we all struggle in a world where we have limited budgets, limited resources, and particularly limited timelines to invest in research. So being able to better understand and access information versus trying the dreaded Google search or Google Scholar search, which is going to return us thousands upon thousands of hits, we can go through an experience to help us better narrow the scope of our research. We also know that it can be really easy to put on blinders. We just keep doing the same thing because we know how to do it. We probably have the skill sets and resources in place, but it's important for us to explore and learn from what others are learning in a rapidly developing field. It also helps us identify alternative methodologies, local approaches, as Jack was talking about, to make sure that we're listening as people are trying to explore new alternative approaches and really what they're learning from that. And then, of course, the root of all of this is to lead to more evidence-informed programming. So we have greater impact and greater outcomes, which is the root of everything that we try to do when it comes to our actual work. So Irene and other databases are valuable in addressing all of these. As Jack was referencing, we're a young field. We're still working to establish and define ourselves. And as we're seeing this testing, validation, standardization, this is a long iterative process. It doesn't just happen overnight. So databases, and in particular when it comes to measurement, Irene can serve as a great foundation for moving that conversation forward. It does help provide some ontological boundaries or definitional boundaries to understand what peacebuilding looks like, how we can better bring in resources to invest in, to fund, to support peacebuilding efforts as the first and foremost method of addressing conflict and violence. I always tell people it's easier to critique than create. Trying to come up with an indicator on the fly, even if you have tons of years of this experience, that's not always the easiest thing to do. So being able to see what others are doing is much easier to then come up with your own, edit, contextualize, etc. And then to really improve upon, how do we know what's been tried in the field? We don't want to repeat each other's failures, and we also want to learn from each other's success. So databases can help us curate that information and experience so that we're not just kind of hunting in that dark, vast mass of, 2.5 quintillion bytes of data to try and find that little needle in a haystack. And I would just say the last part is, a problem well stated is half solved. It's a famous quote, and it makes a lot of sense. Sometimes in our work, we're not even quite certain what's the problem we're trying to solve. So being able to look at curated databases, whether it's resource-driven, whether it's evaluation-driven, whether it's connection-driven, like we're seeing with Connexus, Better Resource Projects, Evidence Project, or Irene, when we're thinking about measurement and indicators, it helps us better conceptualize our problem, which gets us halfway to figuring out the right answer. So I look forward to questions, happy to explore, and I'll drop the links in the website. Irene is a free database accessible to all. I encourage you to take a look at it, and would happy to show you guys a little intro to our current very, very white background digital Irene as we're developing that. Thank you so much, Jeff.
Great, thank you, Jessica. I quickly wrote down a problem well stated is half solved. And I'm hoping what we're seeing is that we're moving past the halfway point, and that that part of some of the new and exciting sort of ways of cultivating evidence gets us to a point where we can really make real contributions to the decision-making side of that equation. So thank you very much. Let me turn now to my colleague Ziad Alashkar, who's the program associate, research associate at the Better Evidence Project. Ziad is also working on his PhD here at George Mason in the Carter School. And he's also done a lot of work elsewhere before coming to the Carter School, including up at Harvard. So with that, Ziad will talk a little bit more about the Better Evidence Project's approach to this question. And he's here with me, and we have this really fancy camera that I'm hoping will twist and turn and focus on Ziad.
Oh, thank you so much, Jeff, and thank you for all the who've joined us in person or online. Again, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're joining us, and thanks for joining the first event of Peace Week. We hope this will be a fruitful and exciting and kind of thought-provoking week as we look towards new ways of building, bridging the theory and the practice of peacemaking and peace building. So very quickly, I just want to give you kind of a little bit of a rundown of what we are doing here at Better Evidence Project, to focus specifically on the pilot of our resource center that we're kind of in the final stages of working on. And kind of Jack and Jessica kind of set the scene really nicely for us. And particularly Jessica's last point is, last presentation, is that there's a lot of information out there. As even somebody whose life revolves around research, it's sometimes hard to figure out where to start and how to validate what works and what doesn't, and you can get lost in 10,000 articles really quickly. And so the goal of the Better Evidence Resource Center is to really kind of help curate resources of what we know from a source of evidence that works when it comes to ending wars or stopping violence and kind of war prevention efforts. And so we kind of take that as our driving and guiding ethos. We do our best to kind of look through what the literature, what evidence exists out there, spanning from the academic field, the nonprofit, the policy world, evaluation reports. And our goal is to curate these resources in a way that is accessible and open to any user. We're not just simply interested in, how do we make the life of a researcher easier. I think our driving goal and the work that we're looking to do at the Better Evidence Project is how can we improve the practice of war prevention? How can we help practitioners working around the world find similar resources? So let's say you're working in a conflict. Let's say you're in Lebanon and you're trying to look for resources about mediation. Our goal is for you to be able to come to our Better Evidence Resource Center and be able to find dozens of cases of what worked when it comes to mediation in a similar environment to the country you're working in. And so really we take this kind of this kind of driving force. Currently in kind of our pilot work and pilot setup, we try to curate the information in a variety of different ways. One of which is kind of a typical geographical way where you can kind of zoom in to different regions if you're interested in learning about evidence of what worked to solve a conflict in Sudan or South Sudan, or what worked to prevent or to bring kind of mediation efforts to fruition in Haiti or even in the United States, that you'd be able to search through this kind of resources through geographic means. But we also want to offer different ways. We offer different ways to look at it through scenes. So you can search through, not as 10,000 indicators as Jessica's alluded to in Irene databases. We try to curate these to kind of a couple dozen ones. So you can search for things like alternative dispute resolution, search by categories like conflict and economics, if you're interested in how does economic drive conflict and what efforts have worked. And so we kind of try to curate our resources in a kind of predefined set of indicators that we find has been predominantly used in the evidence that we've collected. The other way we're trying to also kind of curate the information is by kind of type. So some people are interested in kind of resources that are academic in nature, so kind of books, open access journal articles. Others are particularly interested in evaluation reports. And so we make an effort to kind of distinguish these different types of categories in a way that makes sense, in a way that really any user can access. And the main goal that we have is to make sure that all the evidence that we collect will live on. And so one of the things that we have access to as better evidence as part of George Mason University is our MARS repository, the Mason archival system, which is a great tool, which is a great kind of archival system that will live on for as long as this university lives on. It can live on for 50, 60 years. And this is kind of one of the big things that we're trying to do, is to try to collect this information that partner organizations have been putting up and developed, and make sure that it will live on. A lot of the times we've noticed is information gets lost, websites gets updated, links gets broken, and people lose access to those resources. And so one of the things that we're trying to build through the Resource Center is to make sure that the information that we have collected and helped curate and link to will live on for a very long time, so that in 40 years time, if somebody's interested in learning what worked in 2007 in a conflict in Syria or in Yemen, that those resources will still be accessible at the time. Quickly, I think one of the other things that we were really particularly focused on and going back to is really we want evidence. We want studies, we want work that is proven to showcase what has worked and kind of illuminate us a little bit and provide us some new kind of information as to what has been tried, what has been tested, what worked and what didn't. The particular focus we're developing and kind of building our resources is case studies. We're looking at hundreds of case studies focused particularly at the moment on conflict prevention and focused on evidence of what worked over the past few decades in stopping conflicts and preventing war. And I want to quickly kind of take it back to kind of the notion of, we realize there are dozens, if not hundreds, of organizations who are putting up amazing resources and wonderful tools out there. We see our role as to kind of help curate these resources, help communicate to kind of a general public and wider audience, to donors, to policymakers, about the work that Better Evidence is doing, but then partners in the field. At the end of the day, I think we all share the same goal of building peace and promoting peace and ending conflict. And so that's where we see ourselves. We see ourselves as a big as a resource center that can help curate resources, can communicate, can bring different parties together and different partners. And particularly, we're trying to build kind of not traditional and non-traditional forms of evidence. We want to build kind of make use of teaching material. We want to build our cases when it comes to whether it's dissertation work that's being done in the field from an academic standpoint, what workshops are available to teach people practices and build their skill sets to build peace, and really kind of help link to whether it's material that's developed by Better Evidence Project or by other organizations such as Search, such as AFP or Alliance for Peacebuilding, or Sandra at USIP, which I'm looking forward to this discussion. And so we're in the pilot phases. We're hoping to be able to launch in a few weeks. And so we're building our resources as we go, and we have kind of a system to also kind of look for, similar to what Jack and Jessica brought up, is we're also looking for not just what we find, but also we want people to pitch ideas, pitch work that they've found to be useful, work that they've developed, and so that we can kind of review it and add it to our resource center. And so we want to make this kind of a holistic effort. We realize as a small team that it is impossible to kind of be able to have access to everything and to be able to go over the 2.5 quintillion data points that gets developed on a yearly basis. And so we really see this as a kind of a stepping stone to help people to find resources and then be able to go on further and find additional evidence of what works and what doesn't, whether it's from a research perspective, whether it's for developing programs and practice, whether it's to help guide donors in their decision making or policymakers as they reflect on what programs to fund, what policy action to take. And so I'll end this here. And we look forward to kind of engaging in a Q&A as things progress.
Great. Thank you, Ziad. And I think one of the things I would just like to add to that is that what's exciting about the field and how we're sort of coalescing around evidence is that there are so many different sort of sources or points of entry into sharing resources and sharing evidence. Some of the interesting participatory action research that's going on the ground in conflict affected societies is really exciting. And part of what we hope is both part of the Evidence to Action initiative, but also through the Better Evidence Project, is to constantly be at the forefront of promoting evidence, promoting new research, promoting new ideas, so that this is a very dynamic and organic sort of process and way of showcasing evidence, as opposed to simply putting things up on the shelf or putting them, embedding them online somewhere, that this is constantly being cultivated, updated, new ideas are being exchanged, practitioners are being connected. That's part of sort of the ultimate vision for where we need to go in the field. So let me turn now to our final speaker, Sandra Tombe, who is a recent PhD here from the Carter School at George Mason University. And she is a program officer at the United States Institute of Peace, where she works on the learning, evaluation, and research team. And USIP is very much focused on the development of evidence, the promotion of evidence, the seeding of projects that are creating new evidence. And USIP has been engaged in this for quite a long time, but is working on newer and equally dynamic approaches. So Sandra.
Thank you, Jeff, and thank you to everyone who's been on the panel. It was great to hear from you, and I'm excited for the questions that we'll get in the discussion that we'll have at the end of this session. So thank you for everything that you've shared. As Jeff said, I'm a research program officer at USIP, and I sit within a specific center, which is the Policy, Learning, and Strategy Center. But within that center, I sit within LER, which is the Learning, Evaluation, and Research team. And my team focuses on supporting the Institute, providing support across the Institute on project design, monitoring and evaluation, research, and learning. And so I would like to share with you a few of the efforts that my particular team is focused on as far as the promotion of evidence and learning in particular. The first line of support that I'll talk a bit about is the function of supporting learning, evaluation, research, and monitoring. That comes from LER being what it is in terms of the support function that it plays. So across the Institute, we provide support to teams that help them guide them through the design phase of projects that they're working on. So throughout all of that phase of a project, we weave in evidence. We support teams by incorporating findings from recent evaluations and from research that they may not be aware of. And so we kind of serve at that particular stage as translators of evidence that exists and try to make it a bit more digestible for teams in terms of understanding what does this evidence, what does this research say about a specific problem I'm working on, and what does that mean in terms of the actions that I need to take as a team in terms of improving the project that I'm working on and being able to say something meaningful with the evaluation that I designed. So I would say this is the first critical step in terms of thinking about the kind of promotion of evidence that USIP, that LER in particular, plays in this particular role. The second line of support is through LER's Rigor Fund, which is a fund that is internal within USIP. And it's funding that we provide for teams. It's competitively administered by LER. So there's a competition and teams have to to apply to get this additional funding. Something in relation to a point you made earlier about, Jessica, you made earlier about the limitations when it comes to the work that we do, right? That there's limitations of time, but there's also limitations of funding. And so this rigor fund helps teams design stronger monitoring and evaluation frameworks and be able to use this additional funding to ensure that they're not limiting what their project could actually tell them eventually. And the idea is that when you design a stronger project, then you're able to say something, then you're able to have stronger evidence that could help point you in a specific direction where you could go in terms of what comes next following your project, what are the areas that you can invest in terms of efforts, what projects are doable based on the findings that you're able to get from the stronger evaluation project that you've designed. And so this is our way to also support teams, not just in the technical skills that LAR provides, but to also ensure that a budget isn't the reason you're not designing a strong monitoring and evaluation framework in that particular regard. The third line of support that LAR provides in particular is kind of speaking again to the point of translation of evidence. And it is currently functioning in the context of a brand-backed series on impact evaluations that my team has been organizing. So we started this series in February, and it will continue on until June. And this series highlights impact evaluations that are being done internally by USIP teams, but also ones that are happening externally within the field. So we most recently had a presentation from our Pakistan team, and we'll hear later on from our nonviolent action team. And these are evaluations that they've designed and they're conducting themselves. And it was very interesting to have others, colleagues from other teams who may not currently be working on impact evaluations, attend those sessions and ask really meaningful questions about how do I ensure that I'm able to take something specific from this particular presentation and apply that to the work that I do. So some of our external presenters for this particular work have been presentations from the Abdul Jamil Poverty Action Lab in relation to recent evidence wrap-up that they've conducted. So we had a session on understanding impact evaluations around reducing violence against women. And later on, we'll hear from them about understanding what tools work in mediation and negotiation. So those are opportunities for USIP colleagues to hear what about current evidence that's been generated in the field and try to think of ways to digest that and actually take a step towards identifying what the learning that comes out of this evaluation is and how we can then apply it. In relation to an earlier point, Jessica, that you made, which is around some of the blinders in terms of we tend to do certain things a certain way, and we tend to not necessarily make room for changes, right, or for incorporating new evidence or new learning. And I think this is a general challenge when we think about the gap that exists between like evidence, between evaluations and research, and then the translation that needs to happen for a practitioner to say, okay, this is what I need to do to be able to ensure that my project is informed by evidence, right? So that translation phase is sometimes missing. And so what we're thinking in terms of how we wrap up this series on impact evaluations is to have a panel that actually helps colleagues who are interested in exploring impact evaluations to have the opportunity to hear from other colleagues across the field, those who've presented as part of the series, but also those who have experience conducting impact evaluations, to help walk colleagues about through the process of designing impact evaluations and thinking about what are the tools that they would need to be able to do this work and the learning that comes from that. So this is kind of the different lines of effort that USIP and my team in particular is focused on as far as ensuring that evidence that comes from research, that comes from evaluation is integral to the kind of work that different teams do. But a critical part of that evidence, of course, is the point of learning. And we do that by, we think of this series of impact evaluations as an opportunity for learning as well. But we also support pause and learn sessions where teams are able to kind of have a time where you're not rushing through learning about the experience you've gone through in terms of whether you've conducted research, where you've implemented a project, learning about what was that experience like for us as a team? What were the challenges that came from it? What are the opportunities for learning from it? What is the lesson that we're taking forward in terms of how to improve our design of this particular project or research? And then what does that learning mean in terms of what comes next? And so these are opportunities for teams to delve into learning in an environment that's not intimidating. So it's typically done within internal teams. So you don't necessarily have an external moderator, although colleagues from LER could play that role as moderators. But the idea is for the team to kind of think about where it went right, where it went wrong, and how it could improve its actions in the future. And so I think having those opportunities where learning is happening in more smaller intimate groups, but also learning is happening in larger groups, allows teams to be able to process, to have the time to process some of this evidence and learning and think about what does that translation process look like for us as a specific team. I don't have much to add in terms of other efforts of support for evidence and learning, but I'm really excited to kind of get to delve into questions. I know we're also running a bit tight on time, so I'll stop here and look forward to questions and to hearing more from my co-panelists. So I'll stop here.
Thank you, Sandra, and thank you for sort of helping us dive into sort of an organizational approach to enhancing evidence-based programming and learning. I think that's one of the aspects of this challenge is sort of how does one take evidence and make use of it to transform the decision-making process in a practice-based institution. And ideally, that's what other practitioner-based or donor institutions or policy-making institutions would also be doing in their own work. What we'll do now is turn to questions. For all of you participants, please feel free to put a question in the chat. There is one there already, which I will get to in just a second. But I wanted to ask one question of all of our panelists, and that is to think about, I'm thinking about a quote that I wrote down about 2 months ago when the Alliance for Peacebuilding had its PeaceCon conference. And this quote was from an old colleague of mine, Jake Shapiro, who said that the more you pull back from a distance, the harder it is to show evidence. So the question I have is there a way in which through the new tools and platforms that are being developed, are there ways of connecting the local to the global? Is what we're developing still inductive, or are we able to create ways in which we can generalize a bit more as a field and promote evidence that is more broad-based, more applicable beyond just the local level? And is that the next step where we as a field need to go? So if anybody would like to take a crack at that, great, and then we'll start taking questions from our audience.
Well, I would just say one reflection there, and I think that this isn't a new reflection. I mean, when we think about LetterX, Spiderweb, and connecting, how individual change connects to community, connects to national, connects to international. In my opinion, I mean, when it comes to, how we connect local to global, is that I think this goes top down and bottom up as well. And part of that seems to me that we have struggled to make the connection to both, how we create evidence and tools and processes to bring local knowledge. And by local, I'm not just referencing global South. I'm referencing anyone who's engaged in that community, who lives in that community, who works in that community. How do we connect that with policymakers and program designers and individuals who are creating, often, at that top line, the actual implementation at the field? And I think that through new tools and not only tools, but also I think our general appreciation and thankfully shifting in the field to recognizing not only, I would say, validity, but of course the necessity of starting bottom up and top down, things like Connexus opening up that space for more communication, open communication, people having access to. I mean, whether for good or for bad, the global pandemic provided us with an opportunity where local individuals were the only individuals able to do this work. And I think in many ways, while that's quietly been the case for many years, this shined a light upon a reality that wasn't being seen at the top often either. So I think there's been a lot of opportunities and development here that's getting us closer to connecting local and global more intimately through technological developments, as Jack was referencing, through policy developments like the Global Fragility Act that requires local and evidence-based work, and through a general shift in our entire, I would say, industry. I think we are getting closer in that regard. I think it poses problems and challenges just as much as it provides opportunities, but I do think that we're seeing big shifts there and will continue to do so.
I'll just add a couple of things. I just think Jessica laid out the problem and sort of the potential solutions really, really well. One, and I hate the word democratizing. I feel like we overuse it in the field and it ends up meaning nothing. But we need to democratize what we consider to be evidence in the way that sort of good evidence is not a 70-page evaluation. We need to sort of broaden our understanding of what evidence is and allow local practitioners, local actors who are living this, are sort of utilizing their local expertise and lived experience to inform programming. We need to come up with strategies to collect that evidence and integrate that within this sort of global knowledge ecosystem that we're creating. So like one of the technological solutions that we're sort of using now in response to that is, you don't have to upload a PDF to Connexus if you want to share your information. You can share a 60-second video telling us about your program. You can share an audio clip or a comic book strip. We're trying to capture this evidence in a number of different ways because we know that not everything needs to be a formal report. And we're also trying to help organizations to move away from that sort of style of knowledge generation. And then just on the last idea of connecting the global to the local, I think, and sort of not to bang the drum on the global impact framework again, but this is the importance of having a multi-pillar approach. The global level is the shared indicators across 5 themes that we can track across different conflict geographies, different styles of programs, and over a long period of time. We can merge that with the first pillar, which is the lived experience. Actually localizing indicators, sort of building on the great work that the Everyday Peace Indicators Project has done, the work that Humanity United are doing, along with Search for Common Ground on the grounded accountability model. There's a lot of work being done here, and I think we're just at the start of it. I'm going to finish with just one final point, is I think we have to be very careful about our use of the word participatory and sort of participatory engagement in when it comes to evaluation. Participation is hard work, and we shouldn't overpromise what we're actually going to do. So I think we have to be really, really careful about sort of how we think about this sort of connection between global and local, because participation often reflects existing power dynamics, and we need to be a lot better at that.
On USIP's end, I'll just add, in terms of our support for project design, one of the areas we emphasize is the importance of a project being designed collaboratively. So that's collaborative between teams within USIP, but also thinking about implementers. And Jake, to your points about what it means to be a participant, but also thinking about, the way we're designing this project, does it actually help us? Does it benefit those who are supposed to be participants in this particular project? So thinking about collaboration, not just in terms of other teams within USIP who might be focusing on similar questions and might be able to provide insight by thinking about implementers and their perspective about how this project is designed and whether or not it is actually something that can be done.
Yeah, and I think I'll add just a couple quick things. I think Jack, Jessica, and Sandra touched upon it, but I think one of the main things we have to keep in mind is we have to challenge our predetermined assumptions that we've had in the field for decades. This is why the field has been a very top-down field. And the second thing I think it's been touched upon a little bit is we have to see power in a way. We have to kind of realize that we as practitioners, we as organizations, predominantly sitting in the global north, predominantly acting as kind of funders or implementers, we have to kind of see power and realize that we have also a role to play in kind of removing ourselves a lot of times from some of this, from these kind of assumptions, and kind of allow and support the people that we're working with, and allow them to lead without kind of our interference oftentimes.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you all for those really expansive remarks. A question that came in over the chat was, how can we make policymakers take notice? So I guess to sort of expand a little bit on that is the next stage, or is part of what each organization has developed, is promotion, or getting the word out, if you will, a part of how you have built these evidence-based initiatives, or does that need to be a next step as what we need to create and something for the field to consider?
I'll jump in quickly. We need a coherent story to share. Like, narratives are far more compelling, and sort of hard evidence that we're able to say is like tangible is far more impressive than anything else. So I don't think we're in a position yet to make a cost benefit analysis of peace versus national security and defense. We've seen that a lot of the cost effectiveness research is still severely lacking in quality and grounding in sort of understanding sort of what a shared definition of sort of positive impact is. I think we're getting there. I think that there's a lot to be seen. And I think that one of the most promising things, but also one of the most frustrating things about the peace building field, is that we all have anecdotal evidence of what works. What we don't have is that common understanding of what works. And once we develop that common understanding, that's when we can really make the case to policymakers beyond what we're doing right now, and also not just policymakers, but to the general public as well.
I mean, one thing that I would add there, and I think this is an area where Alliance for Peacebuilding plays a very active role within our policy and advocacy portfolio, both intimately within the US government, but broadeningly through our membership base with the United Nations and the EU, is one, I think the first step, and it sounds almost childish, but is so critical, is the need for evidence-informed policy, evidence-informed programming. The fact that we still don't have policymakers requesting evidence for different types of areas hints at a literacy and capacity gap, I think, within our policy world. So one of the things that we work really hard on is any type of policy work that we do, non-lobbying, lobbying oriented, is that we are focused on saying it needs to be evidence-based, or we need to promote and resource evidencing this component. I mentioned the Global Fragility Act earlier, which really expanded and through bipartisan support, and just released the Global Fragility Strategy, selecting the 5 initial priority countries on Friday, not an April Fool's joke. Was really broadening from a 5-year timeline to saying we're going to dedicate 10 years because this is so important. And research time is so key to being able to look at results, to bring things together. So I think there are processes that are happening. Sometimes it can feel a little bit like a slog, because it's not just how do we get evidence and evidence-informed into and create evidence-informed policies, but how do we create the appetite for evidence? And that is changing, both appetite amongst policymakers and, as I said, improving data literacy to even understand what it means. We did see that in the last few years with the Evidence Act requiring learning agendas across the USG, which is really helpful. And we're seeing that develop across USAID, Department of State. Now, those are small steps and they're slow steps, but they're so critical in building that foundation towards where we want to be. And I think that they are contributing to these broad debates that Jack is highlighting. And I'm sure, Sandra, within your work at USIP, you're seeing these shifts. Jeff and Ziad, I'm sure you're seeing that even within the academic community, but I can guarantee when I came back to DC 4.5 years ago, and I think back to the very first PeaceCon, reflecting upon the role of evidence and the need for evidence for the field, there was such vitriol and frustration and, we can't do this, even question that we shouldn't do this, to where we are now having this conversation. So I think, one of the things that I will say that we flagged and learned, and maybe it's just a hard, harsh lesson that I know Jack will back me up on, is that culture change takes a lot of time and a lot of effort. So these aren't things that just happen overnight. I really appreciated Biden's new statement in relation to the Global Fragility Act, where he talks about prevention is not measured in hours or months, but is in many ways years and lifetimes or generational efforts. So I think reflecting on how these build on each other is really important, because the time framing can be so drastically different. But I think we're making progress and we're setting solid foundations. And by creating frameworks like the work that the Learning Evidence and Research team are doing at USIP, like the work that Search is doing in Global Impact Framework, like the conversations that the Better Evidence Project and their own repositories are creating around the need, they are pushing us forward into a way to conceptualize and brand and share this story so that others, as Jack started, we all love peace, but maybe we don't support peace building. How do we change that shift? Because I think when we break it down, there are a lot of supporters, donors, those interested in this across the fields. So just saying that we've made progress, but there's definitely a long way to go. But I do think there's huge shifts even in the last 4 years.
Jessica, can I just ask you a quick follow-up? What do you attribute the change or the expanded time frame with respect to the Fragility Act? In other words, what that's great. And what do you think led to that? And is that something to build on in a way?
Well, I think all of us on this call, speakers included, I'm sure many of the participants, we all know that peace building change doesn't happen right away. And I think everyone's been saying that for many, many years. I think part of the struggle is, as Jack was alluding to, we all know when things are working and when they're not, but we struggle to conceptualize that and share that in a way that, relates to other more professionally developed fields like education, like health, where it's a lot easier to say we're making a difference. So in my opinion, I think this is a culmination of many very respected voices, researchers, new evidence that we've invested so much time and effort, the academic community like the Carter Center and your researchers, the research community who are doing work independent, the peace building community who are implementing and working hard, government agencies and government supported like USIP. So I think it is a culmination of many efforts. Honestly, where this passed in 2019, we're already 2.5 years in, we're just getting the strategy super delayed. Does that mean we only have 8 years? Like what effect does that have on the timeline? I think there's a lot of growth that'll need to happen there, but I think a general recognition that peace takes time because it's not just one injection and you're good for life. It is changing the way we approach our interactions, the way we reflect upon how society changes, envisioning the future we want. And those things are not, they're door by door, but they're long-term and sustained. And I just think there's a general appreciation of that that's come from the hard work of many different industries that are pushing that forward consistently, repetitively. Everyone jokes about our executive director. She goes into every meeting, like, we need to resource it, we need to fund it, and we need more evidence. And they're like, okay, you're a broken record. And she's like, I am, because this is what we need. So I do think that it's an acknowledgement of that. But I do think, as I said, there's still a long way to go. I would love any other thoughts from those on the call who've also been kind of pushing forward these objectives.
Thanks. We have a question in the chat from Kate Andrade. And she wrote, I have found that just because you have strong evidence for an intervention, it does not mean that you can actually replicate the conditions that generated that evidence when one tries to replicate or scale a program. Has anyone been working on understanding the conditions that ensure the results in an intervention? In other words, it's a great question because is everything sui generis? In other words, how do we generalize from these, whether it's anecdotal or direct research, how do we move beyond that to really have confidence in the evidence?
I think this has to come down to like strong design of these interventions, and ideally when resources allow, the ability to actually test these interventions across multiple contexts. Some of you may be familiar with a Medicare study that IGAP produced that looks at community policing and whether or not it's effective. And I think the findings of that research is very much applicable to contexts that fit the intervention context, but it's also more reliable because they do rely on RCTs, but at the same time, it is drawing on multiple cases and contexts. And so you could draw on qualitative evidence to understand whether or not you could take findings from the case in Liberia, for example, to say whether or not that is applicable for South Sudan. And so I think a response to this really good question is, do we have the resources to be able to test an intervention across multiple contexts that are similar enough, right, that the findings that we get from it can actually say something about other areas that were not the subject of this particular intervention.
Just say we need more process evaluations as well. And that's a lot of what Sandra's getting at, where what gets published is often very much the final results. And even when they are positive or negative or somewhere in that scale, replicating them is really in the details. How did we roll it out? How did we target? How did we sample? How did we develop the tool? How do we test the tool? How do we contextualize it? And a lot of that gets hidden in the jargon or isn't shared. And I think many of that comes from funding constraints in the field, lack of transparency. I think Search for Common Ground has made such amazing progress in being openly transparent about their evaluations, both successes and failures, which have allowed others to learn from that. But we've dedicated so much of our, again, limited resources on evaluating the results. And as we start to see successes, we do need to start to look at the process evaluation so that the quality of implementation, which will have massive indications on the actual quality of results, can start to be tested and understood as well through projects like the Medicatas, but also just simple and stronger documentation and transparency of sharing.
And I think I completely agree with Jessica and what Sandra said as well. It's like we need to see how the sausage is made. It's like, and I think that's a really important part of our work that's really missing. Like people don't actually understand peace building as well, and so because they don't understand what our programs are. So I think it would go a long way to helping us articulate the case for the field. One sort of, I feel like I'm the negative Nelly, but one sort of point just to say, I don't always think I think we're obsessed with the concept of scale. Like, how do we take a program that worked and try and just apply it to every context imaginable? And not every program needs to be scaled. The context change, dynamics change. We need to adapt based on that. So I just offer that one little pushback is sometimes you just have a really good program at a perfect moment in time. And what did you learn from that program? What's generally applicable? But not everything needs to be sort of taken as sort of a fixed menu option and applied somewhere else.
Thank you, Jack. That's a great point. And one of the things that struck me in sort of considering that question and some of your responses is I have over the years many times heard from practitioners on the ground who are doing some type of a peacemaking project. And the question I often get is, not so much what is the evidence and how can we scale something up, but very much at a kind of operational level. What works? What have others found? What are the challenges that someone else found? Can you connect me with someone who faced a similar situation somewhere else? You know, and at times I wonder if we, I was about to say overcomplicate, but in a way, sort of that we're setting the bar too high sometimes for what evidence is, or the evidence that a practitioner may be seeking, which may be sort of more informal advice or not so much guidance, but just a way that they can get counsel from someone else about how did you deal with this? And so I think we don't want to sacrifice the informal connections and some of the anecdotes or learning that can happen from sharing experiences, as opposed to quantifying what has been developed and having really good analytical tools. I think that we have to find ways in what we're doing to incorporate or to combine both in a way. I think we have time for one more question, and there was one that I want to go back to, which focused on the contributions that graduate students or researchers can do that builds on scenario building, computational methods. Is that to what degree is some of the advances we're making on the technological side able to enhance evidence, if you will, and as developers of databases or data, what do you look for?
I'm happy to take that.
Yeah, that's right. You know this a lot. You know this.
Somebody who works with technology a lot and is a graduate student right now. I think that's an excellent question, and I see the question also is linked to the humanitarian development nexus. And I think there's one thing that we definitely benefit from technology is the ability to be able to connect. I think the question also touches upon a little bit of the silo methods, or how much we're siloed as a field. And frankly, I think when we're also talking about issues of localization and technology, you know, it's not just the peace building field that's trying to figure out how to engage and how to utilize computational methods and scenario building. You know, our colleagues in the humanitarian and development field are also doing this kind of work. And so I think there's also benefit of sometimes engaging on some of these issues outside of just the peace building. But on the issue of technology, and I see many people on the panel and the participants who work on this stuff when it comes to evaluation, there's tremendous use of it, be able to collect the data, organize it, visualize it, conceptualize it in ways that in the past would take us, you know, frankly, years to be able to do. Today, you can take 20,000 different evaluation reports, run it through a system, and kind of be able to visualize main themes, main issues, connections, see things that otherwise you wouldn't be able to do in the past. And I think that's opened up a new way for us to you know, utilize this immense amount of research and data that we're generating and we're collecting and developing. There's also the new tools that are being developed, kind of new survey instruments, whether it's things like, you know, sense maker approaches, to be able to kind of develop new ways of understanding, you know, local communities and understanding participants and doing new ways of surveys, or Kobo Toolbox, which is another tool that, you know, you can drag, you know, you utilize questions, you know, 20, 30,000 questions have been used in surveys on this particular issues, and you can kind of build and design these surveys that way. I think technology is a wonderful tool, but I would like to also kind of put on my kind of not skeptical hat, but also be aware of that there's limitations to technology. At the end of the day, it's also, you know, the way you utilize the technology, the human aspects of it, the human component, the biases that go into developing a lot of these tools, especially when we're dealing in conflict settings, especially when we're dealing with populations made vulnerable by conflict and disasters. We have to be very careful of how and what kind of technology and tool we utilize so that we don't make things work. And we also have to understand how the system kind of processes out. So, inputs are important, but we also have to understand the process of the technology that leads us to these outputs. And so my long answer.
No, that's great. And I think that helps sort of frame some of what the challenges are. And to be honest, you understood the question much better than I did. So, great. We have just a couple of minutes. Any final thoughts? I don't see any more questions in our chat room. So any final thoughts from Jack, Jessica, Sandra, or Ziad?
I mean, I would just go back to the question you had posed and Jack was getting to as well, and Sandra, on the quality of evidence is something we're very concerned about at the Alliance for Peacebuilding. And I still go back to that quote that if we can better, understand the questions we're asking and what we need to answer that question, it better dictates the type of evidence we need to answer it with. And I think we tend to fall victim to just looking at one way because that's either prioritized or it's well known. So being open to the fact that research is about applying the best tool, the best approach to get the data we need to answer our questions. So really reflecting on how we can better pose informed, necessary, well-defined questions to generate that data, because we do have a lot of evidence. It depends on what we're asking for, though. So thinking through how to do, I think, that better. And a lot of that is in relation to data literacy, as I was saying, and being able to understand that from policymakers all the way down on the ground to who's collecting it, that we are really reflecting on what we need, not just what we want, to be able to answer that. And I think we could go a much further along than sometimes we give ourselves credit for.
Thanks.
I think I'll wrap by saying knowledge sharing is really, really hard, and building a culture of knowledge sharing, as Jessica said, is incredibly difficult. But I'm much more positive now than I was when I started this work 6 years ago. I know lots of people here have been working on it for far longer than me. And I think we've come a long way in sort of, our understanding of what good evidence is, in our ability to collect good evidence and our ability to analyze it. So I'm very optimistic with where we're going. I'm very optimistic by the use of tools like the Irene database and the global impact framework, and how we're using the complementarity of our organizations and our networks and our channels to drive the field forward, as opposed to viewing each other as competitors. And I think that's where we'll succeed. So I'm very excited to have this conversation today, but I'm also very excited to have this conversation in a couple of years to see sort of where we get to.
I think I'll wrap up with emphasizing, we've talked a lot about evidence, but I would want to marry that with learning as well, because it's one thing to have evidence there, and it's something else to be able to learn from it and actually incorporate that. But I will echo everyone here by emphasizing the importance of collaboration, really, because as many of you have highlighted, we're a relatively new field, right? And we have to explain ourselves in many different ways to policymakers, to others who don't understand exactly what peace building entails. And I think the more we do that together, the easier it is. So I'll stop there.
Well, thank you. Thank you all. And I was just struck by a recent conversation I had with a medical doctor who early in his career had focused on not just research, but evidence-based diagnostics. And he said, don't lose hope. It took the medical field a long time and a lot of fits and starts to be able to develop sort of evidence and make it incorporated into how diagnostics work and how decisions are made. So, you can't, crawl and then start sprinting all at once. So he was heartened by what we're doing in this field, and was very encouraging. The other thing I'll just conclude with is tomorrow, the Better Evidence Project is sponsoring another session, and we're sort of flipping it. We talked about evidence to action. The session tomorrow at 9:30 will be focused on local peacemaking efforts in Africa, in which there will be 3 specific projects of on the ground, really successes that we think make for evidence, are things that there's so much to learn from, and how can we do that from local peacemaking. So I hope you can join us again tomorrow at 9:30 for a bit more to see the connections of evidence in action. And with that, thank you all for who joined us. Thank all the participants, and of course, our four speakers, Ziad, Sandra, Jessica, and Jack. Thank you all very much for a really both interesting and informative session. And with that, we're happy to conclude, and thank you all for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your day, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.